Winnipeg, 55, 2 minutes, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Chicago, 88, minor penalty, unsportsmanlike conduct.
You're listening to 2 Minutes for Unsportsmanlike with your hosts, Kevin Wabshall and Ryan Foisey. Kevin and Ryan drop the myths and talk about the latest news, rumors, and games around the NHL.
Before we get the show started today, just want to ask everyone to check us out on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @2FUpodcast. Hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to For Unsportsmanlike. My name is Ryan Foisey. I'm joined with my co-host Kevin Wabshall. A little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Calgary, still live in Calgary to this day. Did not play any organized hockey growing up, but I have my fair share of beer league from around the point I turned 19 until where I am now at just under 30. And avid NHL fan, growing up in Calgary, an avid WHL fan as well. What about you, Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin. I grew up in Brampton, born in Mississauga, Ontario. I've been out here in Calgary since 2002, so we're coming up on 19 years now almost. I've been playing hockey since I was probably 8 or 9. I don't even remember. Close to 20 years. Also avid NHL fan. Growing up out east, kind of hard not to be a massive Leaf fan, but just enjoy the sport in general and can always get behind a really good hockey game. So
that's awesome. So we're going to get right into things. This is our very first episode, and I think the hottest topic in the NHL, at least within the last week, has been a blockbuster trade that's happened between the Columbus Blue Jackets and Winnipeg Jets, where we had Columbus sending Pierre-Luc Dubois and a third-round pick to the Jets in exchange for Patrik, Laine and Roslovic. And so how the situation had kind of began is at the beginning of the season, Pierre-Luc Dubois had spoken with the general manager in Columbus and had requested a trade. In his last game with Columbus before he was traded, he was actually benched by John Tortorella going into the second period. So he only played, I believe, not more than 4 minutes of ice time in that game.
Yeah, 3:45.
Yeah, there it is. And so traded shortly after to the Winnipeg Jets. Kevin, what are your first thoughts on the trade?
I mean, the trade, not really a surprise. There had been kind of rumblings a couple days before about this possible swap. I understand, including Roslovic. I understand he was holding out on a contract from the Jets as well. So for him to go with Laine the other way makes sense. I still kind of question the return. I like Pierre-Luc Dubois as a player. He's very good. He's awesome in a middle six role, but there's a lot of people kind of ready to anoint him as a number one center that I don't know if I'd quite be ready to give him that yet. And I think Jack Roslovic looks like he should be a middle six forward, in my opinion. At some point here for the Blue Jackets, I think it all boils down to Laine, though. As it stands right now, 1-for-1, just on those assets alone, I think Patrik Laine is a better hockey player. But it'll be interesting to see how he can kind of fit in with Tortorella down in Columbus, because everyone knows kind of how he is with maybe that kind of player, the enigmatic guys who, all the skill in the world, but maybe don't give you 100% on every shift. I'm sure that'll drive Torts a little crazy. But I mean, I think it's nice to see a big name hockey trade where it's a guy for hockey player, not, a dump for picks and prospects. It's fun to see, and it'll have as close to an immediate impact as we can have with the COVID restrictions and him having to sit out some games. But I'm excited to see what this does for both franchises. But as it stands right now, it's hard not to say that this is a win for the Blue Jackets.
Yeah, those are my immediate thoughts too. My immediate thoughts is the Blue Jackets improve offensively almost immediately with Patrik Laine entering the lineup. I do agree with you that Pierre-Luc Dubois, I don't know if I was ready to fully designate him as a number one center, But the thing with him going into Winnipeg is he will be likely slotted in behind Mark Scheifele on that number 2 line. And we'll see if he has a chance to actually move into that number 1 role. I don't know a lot about Jack Roslovic, but it will help to get a little bit more help down in that middle 6 area for Columbus as well. What I see being a challenge for Columbus is they're hurting at center depth now. Their number 1 center is now Texier, who did have a good showing, especially in the qualifying rounds of last year's return to play playoffs. However, small sample size, so we don't really know if he's ready to truly take on that role, and maybe Columbus is still looking at making some additional moves to fill in that number 1 center slot. We know Columbus, and especially since Yarmo has come into control of that team and being the GM for that team, that they've liked to make big splashes and trades, and they always move big names around. And the other part I love is exactly that. It is a hockey, 2 prominent hockey players that are being exchanged, often, especially around like trade deadline, for example. We also always hear about players being traded for picks. In a buy-sell situation, this is both teams that are immediately trying to improve themselves. Both are competing for playoff spots. I don't think either of them at any point so far have put themselves out of the race in their divisions. So
no. Well, it's really hard to write anyone off. I agree with that Columbus point. They're hurting up the middle. I think they just put Dubinsky on IR too, so they're in trouble up the center. One thing for Winnipeg's credit is they dealt from a position of strength. You look at their wing, like you can take Laine out of the equation and still trot out Kyle Connor, still trot out Ehlers. Like that's 2 prominent wingers that you can still throw out there at any given time. So I understand it. Like I really do understand this from the point of view of both teams, and 2 disgruntled players who want a fresh start. I laughed a little bit when I saw it was Dubois asking for a bigger stage, so you send him to Winnipeg. That's an interesting spot, but I think he may relish the chance. You know, he gets to play in Canada. He obviously, growing up in Quebec, I'm sure he was a big Habs fan, so he'll at least get to play in Montreal a bunch this year, and I'm sure that'll be fun for him. But I don't know. I'm a little suspect on him. I don't know if he'll ever, like you said, I don't think he'll have a chance to pass Scheifele. Scheifele, I think, is still kind of one of those underrated guys who, you know, he's not really looked at in the same light as a few of the other prominent number 1 centers, and I think he should be. He's always at least flirting with a point a game. So I don't see why I don't think Dubois will end up taking that from him anytime soon, but Dubois and Scheifele up the middle is a pretty attractive look with Paul Stastny down at the 3rd line center. So their center depth obviously got significantly better, but they didn't really lose a ton on the wing just because they already had Connor, who's a pretty electrifying goal scorer himself. I believe he's in top 5 in scoring right now as it is, and you know it'll benefit him for sure because he'll be the main trigger man on that power play for sure. So, like the move for both teams. Still think the Blue Jackets come out ahead, but only time will tell if Laine, you know, he's RFA after this year, how he meshes with Torts and that team. Don't really have that elite trigger man, and there's something about the Blue Jackets. They always make a big splash, but they just it's keeping the player that they can acquire, whether it's Panarin, Bobrovsky over the years that they've just had a really hard time hanging on to, and now Dubois. So we'll see if Laine joins that list, or if he's able to kind of buck that trend and stay in Columbus long term.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know what it is about Columbus and Ohio in general, but maybe the food choices around the arena aren't that great or something like that. But it always seems to they always seem to lose their elite level players. I think that it's important to consider on both sides whether players re-sign and how long they actually stay with their respective clubs. I think that's what makes it difficult to judge a trade right away. We know that Laine is due for a new contract in 2 years, I believe. And so if he or is it, sorry, Kevin, do you know if it's the end of this year?
Laine's up after this season. This is he's an RFA. Dubois signed a bridge, so he's got this year and next season to kind of go for.
Okay, yeah. So if Laine resigns, then I think that even puts Columbus a little bit even more ahead in terms of that trade. But if he does end up walking or signing a contract with another team during free agency, then that could even things out a little bit. There's always that little bit of speculation in a trade where Winnipeg was probably leaning towards Laine not re-signing with them regardless. So that gives them more incentive to trade him as a player too.
Well, yeah, they took two assets that, like, realistically speaking, they didn't want to be there, right? You had Roslovic, who just straight up was holding out, and then you had Patrik Laine, who has been vocal about it in the past about not wanting to remain in Winnipeg. And I think that part of it makes sense to move on. It's just it'll be interesting. I'm very interested to see how he fits in the Blue Jackets organization. They really don't have that elite guy to set him up, so he's going to have to maybe be a little bit more complete if he's going to be putting up the same kind of offensive numbers, like those gaudy flirting with 40 goals every year offensive totals that we're used to seeing from him. It'll be a little bit harder for him to do. I think down in Ohio, he's got a pretty good division to play against now, whereas I think you could argue the North would have been a little bit easier to get some goals in. You play against some teams that maybe are a little bit more suspect defensively, and it'll be interesting for sure. But I think he'll be fine. I could actually see them, if they don't re-signing him, they may actually end up flipping him for a center. That would be something I could see them going for as well. But again, this is all speculation and hearsay that we'll have to deal with, closer to the trade deadline or possibly into the summer months here when we kind of see how the trade works out a little more.
Yeah, I get you there. So going into the start of the new season, and in that North Division, I'm going to focus on that division. We saw quite a few analysts come out with their rankings and quite a few fans as well in terms of where Canadian teams would stack up, knowing that the top 4 teams make it to the playoffs and the bottom 3 will have an early summer. From what I saw in a lot of my rankings, Winnipeg was on that kind of bubble. They might sneak into that 4 spot, or they will end up in that bottom 3. With that trade happening, do you see that impacting where they'll end up in the standings come the end of the year?
In all honesty, I'm not sure if I see that really affecting too much where I kind of had them going. I also was with the majority in having them kind of in that 3, 4, 5 bubble where you're kind of unsure with those teams. I think I had Montreal lower than a lot of people, and they've really surprised me. But I had the Jets in terms of that. I want to say I had them 5th in my preseason thoughts. And then I think I had the Canucks 6th. No, I had the Oilers 6th, and I had the Senators last, who have actually impressed me. They play really hard. I could see the Jets anywhere from honestly 2nd place to 5th. They're kind of all over the map. They've got a really good goaltender, but their defense is kind of weak. I'm a huge Josh Morrissey fan. I really have liked him for a long time. I have him on my fantasy team now. I'm a big Morrissey guy, but just beyond him, it's kind of pretty suspect. And I don't know. They've lost a lot of really good pieces in the last 3 years. Even you've lost Trouba, Bufflin, Laine now. There's been a lot of pieces that the Winnipeg Jets have lost, where I'm not sure how much more of that they can kind of sustain until they, they're starting to be looked at like the Columbus of the North, where they're losing players, and then they've lost a lot of good talent, and I'm not sure if again, it might be the market, or in Bufflin's case was kind of just like a weird one, but it'll be interesting. They'll fly with Scheifele and Wheeler and Connor, and they'll go as far as Hellebuck can carry them, but I don't know. I don't think they'll be a top 2 team. I'm pretty sold on who I think the top 2 teams are in the North, and I can't see them really supplanting either of them, barring, the unforeseen injuries and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think that's some great points. I did have Winnipeg either at the number 4 or 5 spot, and that's still where I see them ending up after this trade. I do think that in the short term, they might take a step back. Again, they don't have that same offensive output without Laine in the lineup. One of the first games of the season, Winnipeg versus Calgary, we saw how much of a difference maker Laine was.
Yes,
putting their team on his back to beat Calgary in overtime. And he has that shot that only a handful of guys in the NHL really do when you think of players like Ovechkin, players that can get off that quick snapshot and just pick it really within a dime spot on a net. So Laine is one of those guys. There have been talks about how effective he is defensively, and that's up for debate. But you can't replace that kind of offensive output easily in the NHL.
Well, and the counterpoint to the defensive argument that everyone's always trying to make, and that's one thing that I always kind of don't understand, is not every player needs to be, a Patrice Bergeron. There's a reason that Patrice Bergeron is so special, and it's because not every player can do what he does in both ends of the rink. But if you're good at something and you're as elite at that as a Patrik Laine, then, and you mentioned it, he's a one-shot scorer. He needs half a second and he's going to put it in the net. He's in the company of the the Alex Ovechkin, Austin Matthews tier of goal scorers. He really is right there, and it's very special to watch. So it's far too often you see a team trade a player. Well, not really often you see him trade a player of that magnitude, but a team that trades a player of similar or even lesser magnitude of him for a position of more significance. You look at the Philadelphia Flyers trading James Van Riemsdyk. They traded him for Luke Schenn because they needed defensive help. And, I mean, you can't really call that a close trade. So trading that kind of talent away for what you maybe perceive as a need at that time, while I get it, and while it's two disgruntled assets being swapped for each other, it's hard for me to quantify trading something that offensively gifted away in Patrik Laine for a guy who his career high is 61 points. He's good and he's effective at both ends of the ice. Well, he's effective offensively. I'm not super sold on his defensive game, but it goes back to the same trade again. I don't love trading Patrik Laine unless you're getting something of significance back that's either close or a package of players that help you get better now and moving into the future. And I'm not quite sure that Dubois on a third-round pick is quite what I had in mind for him.
Yep. So we talked a lot about Winnipeg so far. And we've kind of hinted towards some other teams in the North Division. With about team 5 or 6 games into the season now, looking at the North Division standings, it's a pretty big surprise to see Montreal at the top. They have yet to lose a game in regulation. They're, I believe, 4-0-2. The 3 of those have come against, or I guess 2 wins and overtime loss were against a depleted Vancouver squad who's been really hurting on the back end in terms of injuries to their defensemen. Edler's been out. Myers has looked extremely shaky. Quinn Hughes is in only his second or third year, and he's playing almost 30 minutes a night, which is a lot to ask of a young defenseman. So Montreal's looked great out of the gate. They don't have the elite top level players like Toronto does with Tavares, Matthews, Marner, or an Edmonton does with McDavid and Draisaitl. But they are getting contribution from all of their lines, and their recent additions, and especially coming up from this offseason, have looked really good. Josh Anderson has made an impact early. He's been flying around, big body, extremely fast, and just loves to crash the net. You don't see much.
Fast. He's so big. You shouldn't be that fast when you're that size. It's cool. Like, obviously, I'm a Maple Leafs fan, but it's fun to watch him. He's been a really pleasant surprise for that team, I think. So,
yeah, there was a lot of skeptical folks after that trade was made with Max Domi, because Max Domi had proved himself. He wasn't a top line forward, Max Domi, but Josh Anderson had just been coming off of, I believe, a 1-goal season and had battled some injuries. So it was really a gamble on Montreal's part because they didn't know what they were getting, where Columbus in that instance did know were a little bit more confident in what they were getting in return for Josh Anderson. And so far it's paid dividends for Montreal, and especially being a rookie who just continues to get better every year and looks like he could develop to maybe even be a number one center for this team. That line has looked good. The Tatar, Gallagher, Danault line has looked good. Montreal has a fairly balanced attack, and as a result, they don't have a weak spot. And maybe Carey Price isn't putting up his best numbers, but they have yet to be exploited in the way they're playing the game.
You could honestly argue that Carey Price has been the worst player on that team, which is, and that's not to say he's been bad. He hasn't been 2015 or wherever he was absolutely ridiculously elite Carey Price by any means. But that team has surprised me. I mean, they're a fun stat for you that I'm sure you love. They have, I believe, the most goals in the league right now. They have scored more goals than any other team. I think 29. I'm just looking at it right now. Next team is the Leafs, 22. So the Habs have the most goals in the league. They've been really impressive. Josh Anderson, I mean, the Habs just have this thing where they'll make a trade and immediately it looks terrible. Look at the Subban for Weber trade. Not a single person was going, oh, that's a great move. And I mean, you can't even argue. Weber is still going pretty strong, and Subban has definitely fallen off. And then you flip over to now, and like even the Pacioretty trade, a lot of people are like, like we don't really know what we have in Nick Suzuki, and Thomas Tatar was kind of average coming out of Detroit, and he's been magnificent for the Habs. Like his play with them has been almost the same amount of points as Pacioretty over the time that since they've been traded for each other, and Suzuki's been a revelation for that team. Now, I mean, a lot of people need to calm down because there's been some weird things I've seen on Twitter. Second coming of Patrice Bergeron, this, that, and the other thing, and it's like, now let's hold on. That's kind of unfair to the kid because Patrice Bergeron as at 21 or 22 put up 70 points, and that's not easy to do for a kid. But can he be that kind of player that kind of reminds you of a Patrice Bergeron without maybe the same level of play, but even slightly less? I mean, for Habs fans, maybe it'll be a little bit more like, is he your new Saku Koivu? Because he could be. And Saku Koivu is, in my opinion, he was one of the most underrated players maybe ever. So good offensively and defensively. Like he'll put you I think he could be that, your 65 to 75 points a year, but just so elite defensively that it just offsets. Like he could be the Taves level where you're not going to get 100 points out of the guy, and that's kind of something that they'll need to understand. But he'll be hard to play against. He'll be amazing defensively, and he'll put up his points and get his fair share. And that's the kind of guy you need that to win hockey games. You need that to win championships. And obviously Montreal's looking at it and going, okay, what do we have to do here to kind of put together a team where we can challenge not just for a first round or, first, second round exit. We want to see what we can build towards maybe creating another champion here. So it's exciting. It is for Habs fans. It's really neat. And I'm pretty excited for you, of course, because you being a big Habs fan, but they actually look really good, and I'll give all the props in the world to them. They've been my surprise team of the year so far.
Yeah, I would, even as a Habs fan and always having that bit of bias, I still had them a little bit more modestly ranked around that, around probably that fourth spot. So to see them atop been a bit of a surprise. And that, again, comes from Nick Suzuki, I think, taking another step forward. And really every line, I think it was heading into the third game against Vancouver, every line had at least 6 points combined between them. Mm-hmm. And so that balanced scoring really helps out. Getting hat tricks from a player like Joel Armia, who usually plays third line minutes. And it's unfortunate that he did get that concussion in the second game against Vancouver. That did send him at least to the scratch list for now. But the Habs even have more depth than that, bringing a player like Corey Perry into the lineup who can immediately contribute, score a goal in his first game against Vancouver. Yep. So good to see that the Habs are making progress forward, and I think they're carrying a lot of momentum as well from their playoff series win, or a qualifying round series win against the Penguins last summer, and then putting up a bit of a fight against a what seemed to be a better Philadelphia Flyers team at the time. Well, let's talk a little bit about your Maple Leafs. They are the team that's been over the summer and into the start of the year. They were the team on paper to beat in this division. Everybody had them, or at least most folks had them ranked as the number one team. Right now, right on the Habs' tail in that number 2 spot. How do you feel about them so far?
I have some mixed feelings about the team, to be honest. I've always been really critical about a couple players who've actually. I've tweeted some dumb stuff about how annoyed I've been with certain players. Justin Hall comes to mind, but he has been kind of rock solid. Shut down McDavid pretty well the 2 games just most recently, and then I thought he had a fantastic game earlier today against the Flames. Kind of a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde, kind of what you expect with the Leafs. You never really know. Sometimes you're going to get that team that just plays Harlem Globetrotters hockey all over you, and you get to touch a puck a couple times, and sometimes you're going to be that team that kind of looks a little sleepy and wakes up late. That you kind of just don't know. Consistency seems to be an enemy with them. I've been incredibly impressed with John Tavares. He looks like he wants to win the Hart Trophy. He's been amazing this year. Matthews has been a little bit of a slower start than I kind of expected. He's usually a really fast starter. I think he got hurt. We'll touch on that a little later about the cross-checking, but I think he got a little banged up in the opener. So he hasn't looked quite as effective. Marner, I think, at times has looked amazing. But he's just one of those guys who can quietly put up a ton of points. He's currently tied for the league lead in points, or might actually be first now. Morgan Riley has been his usual awesome self. 3 assists again today. Just a horse back there. But one of the guys that I really want to bring up, TJ Brody. What a free agent signing that was. A lot of people, a few Flames fans in particular that I had been chatting with, were kind of skeptical with the money that he was given and stuff like that. But he's been the perfect complement. He's very sound defensively. He skates like the wind. He's obviously a very smart player. He's never going to wow you with 55, 60 points from the back end or anything silly like that, but he's just smart, good defensively, is kind of a good safety net to let Riley do his skating and the kind of things he does really well. So I think that was the biggest key addition for me in the offseason. Jimmy Vesey, who I'm sure everyone remembers the free agent chase from him when he was a Boston or Harvard graduate going pro, and he was going to get signed by someone. The chase was on, and a lot of people wanted him. I remember Brian Burke, I believe it was, that said they're going to get VC and then trade Nylander. Glad they didn't do that because Willie's been good. Up and down the lineup's been okay. Kerfoot, I mean, he's okay for a third-line center. I still, to this day, will always go down as missing Nazem Kadri and wishing we never made that trade, but kind of understand why. Spezza's been good. There was the whole waiver thing that everyone was a little nervous about, and then they pulled some little tomfoolery and said he's going to retire if anyone claims him, so he wasn't going anywhere. And then Thornton's been okay. Obviously, he's gone to the injured reserve now with the upper body injury, but he was really good. You can tell the guys just love him, like the energy he brings to the room and everything.
So is it like a Toronto Maple Leafs tradition now to sign one of the aging players in the NHL, but like someone who's at least well known, a Patrick Marleau, a Joe Thornton, and have them basically take care of the kids?
I think they've needed a babysitter. Yeah. I mean, Marner looks like he's 14, so I mean he's getting to that age now where he's probably annoyed that his parents keep making him go to a babysitter. But I mean, it is funny, and it's kind of like, I guess maybe the next guy off the Sharks that gets really old that is going to get signed by the Leafs again seems to be the career trajectory. But I mean, the nice thing is, you've got these guys who are coming home, and for the longest time, and as a Leaf fan, you always read it, like whether it was Stamkos or Doughty or Tavares the first time around when he was a RFA, or before he was even drafted and Burke was going to try and trade for him. You always read about these Ontario kids. You're like, well, they're going to come home. They're going to come home. And, Rick Nash was a huge one where I was like, oh, yeah, they're going to get him. And I believe he signed with the New York Rangers. And it's happened a few different times where it's like, the pressure to play in Toronto, especially in the earlier 2000s or the early 2010s, I should say, they were awful. Like they were a terrible hockey team and they were run poorly. And now it's kind of like more encouraging. Like you see Wayne Simmons again, another one. He's from Scarborough, right? So you see these guys. Brody's also an Ontario kid that are coming home to play, who are now proud to come in home and play instead of like, I used to like the Leafs when I was 9, but they're kind of awful. Like they're not that team anymore. So one thing with that team, like just quickly, I could talk about the Leafs all day, and I don't want to, but one thing with that team is, and a lot of people. I do want to, but we've got other things to discuss. I always get this, there's the trade Nylander crowds and the people who are saying that there's so much pressure on this team that they have to win, the cup this year, next year to be successful. And it's kind of just silly. Like there's been so many teams who have had cores together for longer, who have taken longer, but gotten there. Like look at the Capitals. So I think there's impatience in Toronto and absolutely deservedly so. That team's been, for better terms, they've been a laughingstock for at least a good chunk of the last 50 years. But it's a fun team to enjoy, and they haven't hit their stride yet. That's one thing that I really want to make very clear is that this Leaf team isn't playing its best hockey yet. So once they get to that level, it's going to be really impressive. So I think when they get going, I'll be really happy with their play, but they've got some kinks to work out. I still think they win the division. I still think it's between them and the Flames in terms of that top spot, but I do think that Toronto will win the division. You can't trot out that kind of team on paper and not. But again, that's going to be a Frederik Andersen. Is he going to hold up? Because the first 2 games looked quite shaky. He's looked really good since, and Jack Campbell's providing some really good backup goaltending today. And the previous game, he's 2-0 this year, where I'm confident in net for the most part, and the back end with the revamp looks incredible. The offense is the offense. That team's always going to score goals. So that team looks really good.
Yeah, I agree. They do look really good. I do still have Toronto picked out to win the division. I do agree with the inconsistency pieces, and especially even in the same game, not even just from game to game, but from period to period. As we're recording this is January 24th, Sunday evening, and the Flames have just finished playing a game against the Maple Leafs in which every 5 minutes the teams seem to exchange momentum. So it seems like even earlier games than that with the Leafs, I believe it was against, I want to say even the Edmonton games where they would take a period, they would lay back for a period and then absolutely hammer Edmonton the next period. So that's really what a Stanley Cup team is able to do, is actually play a full 60 minutes. And there's only actually a handful of teams in the NHL that can actually put together a full 60-minute effort. And when your team can figure out how to do that and win all 3 periods, you're going to end up winning a cup that way. And when Toronto can figure out how to do that, they're going to make some noise in the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, it's obviously a game of inches and consistency, but it's a momentum game, and every game's going to have shifts, regardless of if you're Tampa Bay or Detroit, right? You're going to be able to push play and kind of hold the zone for a while, or you're not. And it was a good point. Today's game was inconsistent for both teams. Neither team really held on to more of the momentum for any real extended period of time. There would be like a good 2-minute push in one end and then immediately back in the other end. And it was an ugly game. Like, look at the goals that went in. I think Markstrom's, the goals he let in, 2 of them were tips. Monahan's goal was literally off the back of Campbell. Like, it wasn't, one of those offensive, fun passing, like very pretty games. It was just kind of those. But those are the kind of games you have to be able to win the ugly ones too. And that's kind of a good point I'm going to take away in favor of, honestly, both teams, because they actually both, in terms of playing ugly, they did well today. That was a good hockey game. And some people might say, well, you didn't see the one-timers and the really nice goals, but you got to be able to play in those games, and that's the playoffs. You're not going to get a ton of, diving through or weaving through three guys and roofing it. That's not playoff hockey. You're going to have to be able to score those goals off the back of goalies or tip them in. That's how you're going to have to get your goals. And if you got to get used to it. And that's what I think is so encouraging about this division format, is it's going to kind of set a lot of teams up for playoff hockey. These little mini series, 2 games, 3 games against each other in a row, where you're like, okay, well, this is how you got to play each other. And they're just going to progressively get better and better as you play against each team. And, halfway through, I think we're going to be treated some really good hockey games.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's talk about one more Canadian team before we move on to our next topic, but the Calgary Flames, the city that we both live in right now. And Calgary did make some changes over the offseason, the most notable being the addition of Jacob Markstrom. I think Calgary can finally say they have a bona fide number 1 goaltender in Jacob Markstrom. They've been pushing for that position for a little while by going through a few different goaltenders. Most recently, David Riddick looked like he might be able to trend in that direction and be a bona fide number 1, but did find some inconsistencies and battled with the net, or battled for a starting spot in the net over the last year and a bit with Cam Talbot. It looks like unless something goes way off, that's Markstrom's net, and Riddick's going to be playing the other, maybe on the extended series and the back-to-backs, but that's Markstrom's net until he decides he doesn't want to be there anymore. A couple other notable additions to Calgary, Chris Tanev on the blue line, and then a couple in the depth chart. We have, I believe, Nordstrom and Nestorov, who were both in action today.
Yep.
So far we have Calgary is, I believe, they're 4th now in the division after today's game.
They've got 5 points.
Yep, right behind Winnipeg. So what have you seen from the Flames so far? What have you liked? And are we seeing what we should expect to see?
I think so. I think all of their games have been relatively close. As far as I remember, they're more low-scoring games as far as we've seen. I watched one Flames game that I was really impressed with. They were down, I believe, 2-0 was it 2-0 in the Vancouver game, where they came back and just played unbelievable? I want to say it was 1 or 2-0 after the first period. I watched just parts of the first period. I was doing some other stuff, and came back and watched the second. I was watching the Toronto game. That's what I was doing. And I came back and watched the second and third, and unbelievably impressed. There's some real weapons on that team that maybe don't get talked about enough. One guy I really want to single out, Lindholm, he's fantastic. What a hockey player he is. I liked him in Carolina. And I really liked that trade when it happened. That was another hockey trade that just worked out for both sides. Dougie's been fantastic in Carolina, and Lindholm and has been amazing in Calgary. And Hanifin is one of my. I'm a big Hanifin fan. I'm of the opinion that they can probably groom him to take over once Gio slows down, which I kind of thought he would this year, but he's looked pretty good again so far, even losing his longtime partner in Brody, who we've already touched on. The Flames have looked good. I agree with the Jacob Markstrom points 100%. I'll go out as far as to say, small sample size, I know, but he's probably the best goaltender they've had since 34. Since Kipper left, Markstrom's probably the best goalie that I've seen in the Sea of Red for quite some time, and they've gone through their fair share. The Kari Ramos, the Brian Elliott's of the world. Chad Johnson, I believe, was here for a long time. So the Flames have gone through some metamorphosis in net, and they've I think they've finally found someone who can be their consistency. I like David Riddick as well. I'm a big fan of his. Big Save Dave. the games against Toronto last year, he was lights out. He was honestly, like, Calgary beat Toronto both games last year, and Riddick was, at least in one of them, the reason he beat the Flames won those games. David Riddick, I think, and I think he'll fit really well in a system where it's a 1A, 1B platoon situation where he'll get, if there's an 82 game season, he gets 30 to 40 games. I think he's good enough to be that 1B. I don't know if I trust him to be a 60 game starter, and I'm thinking the Flames we're also thinking that way when going after Markstrom. But I think that's the direction the NHL will start moving anyway, because it's hard to pay, like we had kind of actually tweeted back and forth, it's kind of hard to pay a goalie a price, $11 million or $10.5 million to do his job when you've got to fill out the rest of the roster. So I think we're going to see maybe a more push towards that, Islanders type situation where you've got two guys making $2-3 million that are putting up similar really strong numbers in net, but don't have to play every day. And I think that'll benefit you come playoff time. Now, that being said, Markstrom, 56 games, I'd be surprised if he doesn't play at least 40 to 45. He's good enough to do it. So goaltending, they're set. Now, defensively, I was actually one of the people who've been pretty critical of their moves on the back end. I liked Brody here. He was actually the first Flame, aside from obviously Iginla, when I was younger, that I actually really came to admire and like. I got a TJ Brody t-shirt. I still have it somewhere in my house. I was always a big Brody fan. So I liked Brody. Losing him, I think, maybe hurt a little bit, but Rasmus Anderson has really stepped up and looked really good in his spot alongside Giordano there. Gio, he's ageless. Like, he's, I think, 37 years old, and he doesn't look like he's playing like he's 30. He still skates well.
Yeah, on the socials there on the Flames, he's known as Young and yeah.
He's awesome. Like, it's just that team, like, that top pair is really good. Valimaki, it's nice to see him get back after that injury. I have pretty high hopes for him. But I mean, their defense still has to be pretty good. You've got guys like Shillington, who I actually am pretty high on. I think he's a pretty good player, and he's on the taxi squad. So you've got some pretty good players, some really good depth on defense, and I think that's the Flames thing, is depth. Their depth is really good. They were putting guys like Ryan down on the taxi squad to start the season, and I know that's partly just cap stuff to just bounce them back and forth to kind of save yourself, because every time you do that, you save yourself like a couple $1,000 a day, which when your teams like Toronto and Calgary, who have spent a lot of money, you need that kind of extra room in the event that you do lose someone. So that looks good. Now up front, I like the top line. I like Tkachuk. I really like Lindholm. Those two together have always played really well. Gaudreau and Monahan look energized to start the year and look like they're back to their old ways of playing, and that's always a good sign for the Flames. But it's just those third guys on those lines I'm still not super sold on. Whether it's I like Mangiapane. I think he's pretty good. Levo, I don't like. I obviously know him from coming from the Toronto system. Not sold on him being anywhere near your top six, and I know he's been bumped down since. But he is a versatile guy who can kind of play anywhere. Simone, I actually don't really know a ton about. I'll kind of let you handle that topic, but I'm not super familiar with Simone. That being said, you got Sam Bennett playing with Michael Backlund, and Dubé's hurt at the moment, I believe. Yeah. Sam Bennett is this one guy who everyone in the entire hockey world is kind of like, well, what is he? And I kind of think the Flames management team's like that too. He doesn't get a role. You don't go into a game penciling Sam Bennett in anywhere, because it doesn't matter where you've penciled him in. One game he's playing with Gaudreau and Monahan. One game he's centering the third line. One game he's playing with Lucic. Like, you just don't know what you're getting with Sam Bennett, and I think that is partly hurting him more than anything, because you don't know what you want from him. Like, do you want him to be defensive or offensive? Do you want him to be physical, or do you want him to score goals? What do you want from him? And he's one of those guys that I think would really benefit from a change of scenery. I don't know what his ceiling would be. I was a big fan of his in his draft year, but he's a guy I could see in the offseason being offloaded for a similar player, maybe to kind of do a double resurgence move, a la maybe a Dubois trade. Obviously less prominent, but in that kind of role. Lucic is, he, I guess, does what he's supposed to. I'm still not sure why he's on the roster. He's toughness, sure, but I don't really. I guess he's there to stop people from going after Tkachuk because he can be quite a pain. But I think top to bottom, the depth is really good. They're another team where their high end isn't quite to the level of the Torontos or the Edmontons or the Winnipegs that have those guys that can flash and score, 30, 40 goals in their sleep. I think Tkachuk's on his way to being one of those guys who should be a point per game guy who's hard to play against, and I'm a big fan of his as well. But I don't see them having any guys that are going to be those 90, 95 point guys. Gaudreau maybe, but I don't know if he'll be able to replicate that 99 point season again, right? So
I will say that like Gaudreau has looked a lot better going into the start of the season. We know he did fall off last season quite a bit, but he is only 2 seasons removed from being one of the top scorers in the NHL. So we have to take that with kind of a grain of salt. Will he get back there? Or has he been figured out? That's yet to be seen. Where I struggle the most with Gaudreau is when it gets into playoffs. There's a certain type of playing style in the regular season where his type of agility and skating and elusiveness is very effective, but it seems to absolutely vanish come playoff time when the bodies really start flying. He just, with the tighter checking games, he can't seem to find that space, which makes him so effective as a player. And he doesn't have the physical strength or hardness in shot to be able to be effective from the outside. So unless he finds a way to cut to the inside, get to the net, make those kind of plays, he's still effective as a setup person, but in terms of actually scoring or just leading or being one of those top players in points, it'll be difficult for him to get there. And I think what we've seen is when teams do figure him out, he can get pretty frustrated with himself as well and lose his confidence in his game. And I think his confidence is the difference between when he can be a 90-plus point player in a full-length season or a down to a 50 or 60-point player.
Yeah, because Gaudreau, all the talent in the world, but he's one of those guys, and at this point, it's hard. You can't really try and say like I need Gaudreau to be this or that. At this point, Gaudreau is 27, 28 years old, maybe even 29. Here's what he is. He's a smaller guy, and he plays a smaller game. But it's true. Come to playoff time, his little move, and I joke about it a lot. He loves to spin, and he'll come into the offensive zone and turn back, and that's as effective as you can want it to be in the regular season. But once the playoffs come around, there's no room to do that. And for guys like him, that's when you got to kind of smarten up and use your legs, use your speed, and instead of doing that turn back and curl, you got to go wide. You got to try and use that vision, which he's known for, where he's got incredible vision, and his passing is in the top 5% of the league in terms of his ability to put the puck on someone's stick. And you can ask Sean Monahan about that. But that's the thing with him, and it's the same kind of thing with Monahan, is they need that extra gear. And it's becoming apparent. And as someone who will actively, I will cheer for the Flames. Like, I've gone to tons of games here, and I, again, I like good hockey regardless of who's playing. I like the Flames. I like watching the Flames, but there's no player, and I've said this to a lot of people, there's no hockey player in the world that has frustrated me more than Johnny Gaudreau, because he has the ability to be more than he is and do more than he does, especially come playoff time, and he just doesn't. And it's like he got an assist in 7 games and stuff, and I'm not 100% sure on his exact stats, but it just feels like once the playoffs rolls around, he may as well be on the 4th line, because he's not there.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, I agree
this
with
has to be their last chance. Like, this has to be, and I know I said this last year, but now it's really true. If they flutter out, if they make the playoffs.
Do you think he's out to the Metro Division or something like that? Do you think he's on the trading block?
He could be back home, over to Philly or something, because it's just Gaudreau reminds me of, not stylistically, but kind of impact-wise. He really reminds me of Phil Kessel. When Phil Kessel was traded to the Leafs, he was kind of expected to be the focal point of the offense, focal point of the team, and that's just not who they are. They're really, really strong complementary pieces. Phil Kessel is such a perimeter, offensive threat, obviously different level of shot. I'd say Phil Kessel's shot is akin to Gaudreau's playmaking, but for all intents and purposes, they're similar players in that style, where they're not able to really take over a game, especially come playoff time, because they don't play physical. They're very perimeter driven players who, when it all tightens up, they're not able to get their open ice and create the offensive that they usually are used to doing, and they'll get frustrated. And when they do get frustrated, they aren't able to kind of capitalize on those opportunities. So Gaudreau's he is what he is. I think Calgary needs to, if they plan on keeping Gaudreau, surround him with guys that are playoff performers, which it looks like they're trying to do. But if they can't get it done this year, at least a playoff round, it's kind of, he's got to be on the hot seat. Him and Monahan, because Monahan too, he's 6'2", 6'3", and when the playoffs roll around, you can't tell. So,
yep. It seems like Monahan is always battling some type of injury heading towards the end of the season and into playoffs, and it seems to either hinder his physicalness or shooting ability, and his shooting ability is really his bread and butter. Mm-hmm. I think we can go down this conversation for a while, and we'll save some of it for future episodes, but I think I want to move us along to the next topic. I want to talk generally about the NHL restart and how it's been with COVID. Now, we know that we just came out of last year a return to play, which was all in bubbles. So we had one bubble in Toronto, one bubble in Edmonton, where the East and West playoff teams played. And then when it got down to the Stanley Cup final, I believe it was actually the conference finals, was all played in Edmonton, and then the Stanley Cup final played in Edmonton as well. Now that we do not have this bubble situation anymore, we've had to restructure the divisions, or the NHL has had to restructure the divisions so that we have the 7 Canadian teams in a North Division, and then the remaining 24 teams split into new divisions within the United States. What have you thought so far of how the NHL has restarted this new regular season? And with the COVID impacts, we know that a couple of teams have been impacted by players either being exposed to people that have been affected by COVID-19 or have themselves been impacted by COVID-19. We've seen the Washington Capitals been fined $100,000 for breaking COVID protocols. We've seen the Carolina Hurricanes have multiple players and had to have some of their most recent games postponed. And we've seen the Dallas Stars, who were the first team to actually be impacted by COVID-19 coming out of the gate. They actually didn't play their first game until just a few days ago. And so what do you think of this situation so far, and how COVID-19 is impacting the return to play? And do you think the NHL is handling it well?
I think the NHL, aside from obviously the outliers that you've mentioned, they've handled it really well. And what I kind of found interesting about it was the NFL didn't really have this problem. There was a couple isolated incidents, the quarterback situation in Denver and such of that effect. But the main thing is for the most part, most teams have been pretty safe and have been pretty responsible. The thing with the Capitals was kind of disappointing, especially guys like Ovechkin doing that kind of dumb stuff. But I think that also might have been blown a little bit out of proportion in terms of what we were looking at. That being said, I thought the NHL's handled it really well. I think the divisional idea was actually pretty smart, especially geographically, and given the challenges with trying to get players and personnel over the border. You can't have 2-week breaks every time a team crosses into Canada or the United States. It just doesn't make sense. So in terms of how they've laid things out and how they've made the divisions, I thought that was outstanding. And the way that they've been able to kind of compress the schedule. Yes, 56 games, that's it. That sucks. But, I'll take 56 over none every day of the week. They're being smart about it. I believe there's a couple teams that are able to have fans, but pretty clear that most of, at least all of the Canadian teams will not. For the remainder of this year, I'd imagine calendar year. Actually, we shouldn't have any teams that have fans here, but I think they've handled it well. They've done a really good job to get us back to being able to enjoy the product that yourself, myself, and so many do love watching. So the NHL's handled it well. I like the divisional layouts. It's clearly benefited some teams, which I think we can kind of go into maybe at the next recording here in terms of, who this helps, who this hurts. But I think they've done a really good job with getting us back to where we need to be in terms of getting hockey back for a lot of reasons. Mental health has been really affected by this pandemic and everything shutting down, and not being able to see loved ones or friends or being able to actually go and play the sports, being able to go to a bar to watch the Flames game. There's so many things you can't do right now, and the NHL being able to put it back, and props to them following kind of in suit with what the NFL was able to do with them not missing a single game, which was impressive. The NHL should aim for that. But really well done by the NHL, and they should give themselves a pat on the back for being able to get us back to the situation we needed to be in to be able to play these games.
Yeah, one point I wanted to touch back on there is, there are a few teams that are allowing fans at limited capacities, and we know one of them is the Florida Panthers, and the running joke has been, will they even have enough fans to ever hit the the restricted capacities for COVID? And
They're
so
setting records.
it already probably looks like a regular home game in where do they play? Sunrise. So
Sunrise, yeah.
So the nothing's really changed there, but yeah, we do hope. There have been talks, I know, around the league, and it's until we actually hear from an official source from the NHL, it's mostly speculation that the teams will open up and it'll be with limited capacity seating where you and people from your family or your cohort will be seated, and then there'll be at least 5 or 6 seats in between you and the next group of people. And then there'll be physical distancing measures throughout the concourse areas and things like that. I do think that in terms of how the league needs to manage themselves going forward, there is some importance to kind of get some of those things back. And I know as both Canada and the United States are currently rolling out vaccines for COVID-19, and we hope that will also play a role in opening up some of these arenas again. I know that Gary Bettman, in one of his recent announcements or conferences, stated that the loss in revenue for the NHL this season will be in billions, not in millions. It will be in billions. That just due to the lack of fans at games.
Well, the ticket sales, right? They've lost so much.
Yeah, the ticket sales, and everything the arena brings forward, and all part of that experience. They will make a little bit more through broadcasting revenue, I'd understand, and things like NHL Game Center, but that does not even put the smallest dent in what they would get through ticket revenue. So,
yeah, it's it's going to be tough, and obviously the NHL, yeah, they're losing some serious dollars in terms of this season. They lost money on the bubble last year. But yeah, there's only so much that broadcasting rights can overcome in terms of, not having fans there. Even when we had full capacity, you still had teams in Arizona and Florida who were just bleeding money. And right now that's every team. So everyone's got to keep into perspective that the league pays the salary cap or for the players. So those salaries are coming off too. You've got guys making $11 million a year. So there's a lot of money that's in this NHL right now that isn't, it's being distributed but not being recovered. And, there's a long-term effect to that may happen where ticket sales may be more expensive or what have you. And I certainly hope not, because living in Canada, hockey games can be a little expensive. I mean, I know trying to get tickets when the Leafs are in Calgary is ridiculous. You're paying $100 minimum for nosebleeds. So, and as the same thing with Montreal. So, I'm hoping we don't have a huge increase in that kind of stuff, or jersey prices or things like that. But
or the beer, most importantly, the beer going from right now, I believe
10 to 20.
Yeah, from 10 exactly. We already do. If you're someone that likes to indulge in a few arena beers during a game, I mean and I guess Calgary would be probably considered one of the lower ends. Their beers around 10-50, and some of the folks, especially, or some of the teams with new arenas, beers are 14 plus. And so, what's that going to look like when exactly that? Ticket prices go up, concession prices go up, beer prices go up. It's going to be a privilege to be able to go to a hockey game when things initially reopen, and hopefully that levels out over time. But yeah, I think exactly
definitely something you took for granted, right? Like looking back, you're just like, man, there's nothing I would like more right now than to go to the game here on Tuesday, Flames Toronto, and just pop a couple dome foams back and just enjoy myself. And like, there's a lot to be said about watching sports live, and its experience by itself that is so much better than watching it on TV. And you know, bless the studios and Sportsnet and TSN and everyone for putting together the product that they do, but it just, you can't capture the atmosphere of being there in person. And you know, they've done a really good job with trying to, but you know, no fans. I still find the artificial fan noise so weird. I heard a joke the other day where it's like, why is the Air Canada Centre or Scotiabank Arena, I guess, now so loud now? It's like the speakers are just really loud. The people aren't there. But it'll be interesting. I do miss it. And I mean, how much are beers in the have you been to Edmonton's new rink?
I have not been to Edmonton's new rink, Rogers Arena. Rogers Place. I always get Vancouver's and Edmonton's mixed up, but I have not. I guess it's somewhere around the $15 mark for at least the tall beer.
Yeah, I'll have to find out from someone who's been up there, but it's like the new rink like that too, and I mean, Calgary's a couple years away from theirs, and that hike that we're already going to get, so hopefully we don't get two, right? So
yeah, for sure. All right, we're going to bring us back to some gameplay topic, and you hinted at this earlier in the episode, and we were talking about specifically when you're going into the Leafs conversation about Matthews early on, and Matthews, it looked like he suffered some sort of injury in the very first game against Montreal. It looks like he is getting pretty beat up in front of the net. Weber, Sherratt, a few folks got some good cross checks in there, and it opened up a debate because this is something that happens frequently with a lot of players across the NHL. Is what is good and what is not good in front of the net, and it seems like, well, not seems like, it has been for the longest time that if you are trying to clear a player from the front of the net, you typically can get away with more than you would anywhere else on the ice in terms of cross-checking, body checking, interference, holding.
Unless you're Zdeno Chara, then you can just do that anywhere. But that's a topic for a different time.
That's a different day. But
yeah.
So we've seen there is the occasional injury that comes from Matthews being the most recent prominent example, having to miss a couple games due to upper body soreness, and just returning today, actually. So I would imagine, being a Leafs fan and seeing your star player impacted specifically by this, you're probably leaning towards the why is this stuff allowed in front of the net, and why is this the place that you get to get away with it? So why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Well, and actually Tim Stützle for Ottawa, same thing. And it was actually a cross-check from Jake Muzzin, I think, that took him out. So, there's two sides to every coin. It's hard to defend in hockey at any level, but especially at the NHL level. So Matthews is not an easy guy to move. It's not easy to move guys out in front of the net, and cross-checking's been there forever. Like, go back, you want to watch someone cross-check people, just pull up Chris Pronger highlights. I'm pretty sure that's all he's ever done. But, I mean, it's getting to the point where you've got your hands sideways and you're cross-checking guys in the lower back, where, as you and I are very familiar at playing the sport, there's no protection there. You got no padding there. You got no protection. So there's something that cross-checking, it's literally in the rule book that you're not allowed to do it at all. So it shouldn't be tolerated anywhere. If you cross-check a guy from behind into the boards and he goes face first, you're getting 5 minutes. But if you cross-check a guy in the back in front of the net, unless you're Brendan Gallagher, but again, the officiating will be a hot topic I think we can do next week. But Cross-checking, I don't think you should be able to do anywhere. I don't think you should be able to cross-check someone in the back, in front of the net, at center ice, anywhere. Like, there's been too many instances where you're leaving a game banged up, and your lower back is just taking a beating from this. It's a dangerous play. It's more dangerous than people may realize. It deserves to be called, and it should be called every time, not after 3 or 4 times. Like, you can't be, just to use an example of someone, just to throw a name out. If you're Shea Weber and you're sitting there cross-checking a guy for a minute and a half straight, you only get called at the end. Like, it should call right away. It's against the rules. If they're able to pull the challenge on all kinds of other things, like if you touch a guy's glove with your stick, it's hooking. You're telling me that that's more dangerous than cross-checking a guy in the lower back? Like, it's just silly at this point.
What I would love to see from the NHL and from the officiating, if the goal is to stop these instances from happening, I'd like to see them have a similar approach to what they did with slashing, especially in the hand area. It was about 2 seasons ago where they really started to crack down on that. And exactly that. Anytime a stick would get near a hand, it would touch a hand or it would come over top of the other part of a stick. That's an instant slashing call. And I think after there was probably the most frequent penalty called for the duration of that season. But getting to where we are now, it's happening much less frequently. I think it's just the refs. You got to spend a good season cracking down on it, and then players will learn to adapt their game so that they're not doing it as frequently.
Well, it's the same idea. It's not a hockey play. It's not. Your hands are both perpendicular to the guy's back, and you're pushing out at him. That's not a hockey play. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you say. I've been playing this game long enough to know that's not a hockey play. Like, I understand if you're trying to push off from a guy, but if you're cross-checking a guy in the back who's standing in front of you, just trying to stand there, it's not a hockey play. And I'm not one of those guys who wants to make the game softer or anything like that. You know, one of my favorite players growing up and was Dion Phaneuf. I love body checking. I love hitting. I love fighting. It's something that has a place in the game, but cross-checking, I just don't think does.
Yeah, you're right. Do you think that at any point cross-checking should be a more severe penalty, or do they just need to crack down on the instance of it actually happening?
I mean, that's kind of a hard question. I don't think it should be. I don't know. I don't think cross-checking deserves to be a major or anything. Like, depending on severity, you could maybe argue a double minor. Like, if high sticking and you draw blood is a double minor, then why isn't that? But at the same time, I think just crack down, call the plays more, prominently, and say, you know what, like, cross-checking is not going to be tolerated. Like, end of the discussion. Like, if you're in front of the net and you extend your arms with your stick in your both hands and the guy ends up on his stomach, you're getting a penalty. Like, end of discussion. That's how it should be. Another thing I wanted to, and I guess we should do this on the next one, would be expanding challenges for penalties. If you can challenge a guy whose foot is on the ice for offside, why can't you challenge a high stick that's errant, or a tripping penalty that maybe shouldn't have happened? But we'll get into that next time. But it's just, cross-checking is a big one where it's a dangerous play. I've endured being a forward for the vast majority of playing hockey in my life. I've endured enough cross-checks to be able to say, like, it's not fun. So that's something that needs to be cracked down on, and needs to be cracked down on sooner.
I think we agree on that one in terms of we just want to see players. We don't want to see the injuries happen, and especially for a defenseman, your goalie is the person you want to protect the most, and therefore that front of the net space is the most sacred space for your team to defend. And understand why you want to do everything you can, but there's a safe way to do it, and there's a reckless way to do it. And I think, I agree with refs need to be actually handing out minor penalties more frequently when these kind of things are happening, and right away. Don't just wait for one or two or the third one to happen, or the player to fall over. As soon as you see the motion with the two hands on the stick go into the body, blow the whistle, or at least put the hand up for the delayed penalty. Yeah,
well, absolutely. And obviously there's going to be gray areas, and there always is, where, like, you just push off a guy and that's your only way of doing it. There's going to be that kind of things. And if that's the case, like, if you're pushing off to just kind of set yourself up to shoot or things like that, then you can kind of talk about maybe that's not it. But I mean, that can maybe come back into a callback of, challenging and things of that nature. But for now, it's a dangerous play. There's been too often. You brought up the Gallagher hit, and there was actually a hit on him earlier in the game that was also very, very dangerous. And there are these plays where, yes, it's a fast game. Yes, these things are going to happen. But to just dismiss it as that and not call a penalty is kind of getting to the point where it's a little frustrating. As a fan of hockey and of the best players, I don't want to not be able to go to a game because of us, like not being able to see my favorite players play because he's been beaten up in front of the net by cross checks to the back and has to sit out. So that's part of the frustration for me. And I'm sure you share in that sentiment where, you want to watch the best players play. You don't want to watch the players get hurt. And that's part of protecting them. And maybe as much as the NFL gets a lot of flack for protecting quarterbacks, especially star quarterbacks so hard, the love triangle for Tom Brady and the refs and everything like that, is maybe they have it a little right, though. You should protect your stars. You're going to make a lot more money when you've got players like the Matthewses of the world, McDavid's on the ice versus when they're not. So you got to protect the guys at least somewhat. And I know that, some defensemen out there aren't going to love that, but find a new way to defend or be able to shut them down effectively without having to cross-check and possibly cause harm.
Yep. We're running down to probably a few minutes left that we want to talk today, but we got one more thing we want to chat about. And you brought this up actually just before we started recording. Something of note. We have a rookie in Chicago, Pius Suter, who has set a record with a second place for the franchise for a hat trick scored in the first 6 games. Undrafted kid. What do you got to say?
Yeah, Pius Suter. I had not even heard of this guy before. Undrafted free agent, Czech Republic, from the Czech Republic, but looks like he played in Switzerland. Actually played hockey here back in the OHL in 2013 and 2014, and then 14-15 for Guelph. Scored 3 goals, the last of which was actually very nice. Really impressive. That's the kind of story you like to see. So some really great stuff coming out of Chicago in times where, they're probably in for possibly I would guess a lottery pick this year. So, some encouraging things out of that city and for that team who, it's hard to feel bad for a team who had that dynasty in those cups so recently, but hard times as of late. But that one was really cool to see and cool to see stories like that of kids who come in at 24 years old and pop 3 goals in their 6th game. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you always I'm always actually debating, because Stan Bowman there does most of the GM work, and I'm always debating, and maybe I should give more credit to the scouts actually than anything else, because you look at Chicago and their scouts and their team find a player like Artemi Panarin and bring him in, and Panarin just turns into an absolute stud. You play him with Patrick Kane, he's putting up goals every game, and then you ship him away for Brandon Saad, which in the rearview mirror does not look like a great trade. But I think I read a tweet the other day where Stan Bowman has been involved in 3 trades involving Brandon Saad, and I guess you could still say subjectively, but you could say he's lost all 3. So
yeah, he shouldn't. I mean, the Chicago Blackhawks as a whole, I don't know the last time I could say definitively they won a trade. They get themselves into some real sticky situations with the salary cap, and I guess you could kind of argue the same thing with honestly Pittsburgh. They get themselves into this situation with the salary cap where they've built a really, really good team and then can only keep half of it. Like, they've shipped out guys like Ladd, Bufflin, and all that after their first Stanley Cup. They lost Versteeg. They lost Dave Bolland. They've lost so many players from those teams. But then for some reason, it's like Stan Bowman just loves to try and get the band back together. So he always seems to pick at least 1 or 2 of those guys back up. And Saad is an interesting one. And I remember my cousin is a massive, massive Chicago Blackhawk fan. And I'll never forget how upset he was when they traded Panarin for Saad. It didn't look good at the time. That's one of those ones where you're just like head scratching. It was like Rask for Raycroft bad. Like, what are you doing? So
regardless of whether Panarin was going to stay in Columbus long term or not, or whether he would have ended up in New York, it's still, I think, just straight up in that moment, you're giving up really an elite player for Brandon Saad, who's not a bad player by any means, but he's not Artemi Panarin, and not even close. And so he makes you shake your or kind of question that ability quite a bit. And I also look recently at another trade Chicago had with my Montreal Canadiens, where they traded Philip Deneau for basically Dale Weiss was what the trade ended up being. And Deneau has turned into an amazing. He's a middle six center, so he's played second line and third line, and he's shutting down top line centers. He's a really great defensive center. He's not going to score you a million goals, but he's gonna take Austin Matthews, for example, and he's going to stick to him like glue and shut him down for a game. And so it looks like Chicago has been on the losing end of a lot of those trades recently. I think another topic we might want to get into in another conversation is I use Stan Bowman as an example, actually, a GM that kind of holds on to their position because they have a legacy with the NHL or even specifically with a certain team, and they just can't seem to do wrong. I think we saw a lot of that in Edmonton for a long time with the Old Boys Club. And having, even pre-Peter Chiarelli, having Craig McTavish and that group, basically it was just...
Chiarelli, yeah, he's a good point. Because Chiarelli, even in Boston.
Yeah, and so like how much, you have Cam Neely there, who's running hockey operations, and Cam Neely is, of course, Boston Bruins alumni as well. So how much... how comfortable do you get with these legacy NHL players that have now gone into executive positions on different NHL teams? And I'm sure some of them have been very successful. Steve Yzerman, I think, is probably one of the best examples of someone who has gone from a player role to a GM role and been extremely successful. But then you look at like a player like Kurt McTavish, who was a great player in his day, but the end was a good coach for a period of time, but his in the general management kind of position of things left something to be desired. And so because of their legacy, how much of a leash do they get before they are cut from the team? I think Stan Bowman's another example of he's made some pretty iffy trades, but you never really hear of him being on the hot seat. So maybe that's a topic we can get into another one. I want to kind of wrap us up here. We are a little bit over an hour. We're going to try and keep these at least a little bit shorter for these first few episodes. But the good thing is we do have a lot to talk about. So we look forward to hearing from some of our first listeners. You can find us right now. My Twitter handle is Ryan_Foisey. Kev, I believe yours is at KevWab.
Yep, correct.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll also we'll add here, I'm just going to add to the recording after, we'll have a few social accounts, an Instagram, a Twitter, to follow to keep up to date with when the latest podcasts are coming out. It is to be determined when the next episode will come out. We'll decide whether we want to do these weekly, bi-weekly, monthly kind of thing. Let us know. You can always fire us a message through the socials. Let us know if you like the content, if you want to hear more of us, less of us, hopefully more of us, but
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, thanks for joining us on this first episode, and take care and have yourself a safe and well time, and we'll be back soon.